I'm delighted to bring a person who's written a book called Elvis and Ireland. And what grabbed me about the thing is the title, Elvis and Ireland. I never thought of what influence Ireland, Elvis might have had on the youth of Ireland, because Elvis Presley's rock and roll days was just one era before me. I was more the Beatles era. But I'm delighted to have the writer of that book, Ivor Casey, on the line. Good morning to you, Ivor. Thanks for coming to Spain, or welcome to Spain today.
Thank you very much, Maurice. Thank you for having me.
Okay, I'd love to bring you here, but I'm not bringing you here. We're on the line. Now, Ivor, let me ask you about the title of the book, first of all, because that's what grabbed my attention. I've read many books about Elvis, but this is the first time. We all know Elvis never travelled. We know the only country I think he's ever been into was Germany. He stayed in, but I think he touched down once in Scotland, the plane that he was on. But he'd never been in Ireland, had he?
No, he hadn't. No, the only place he had been to was Germany. He took a little holiday down to France while he was in Germany. He went to Paris, and the only place other than that was the little touchdown in Prestwick Airport in Scotland. But unfortunately, it didn't stop down in Shannon. But that's the way it was at the time, you know. And he went back to the States and never set foot outside America again.
But it was always rumoured the reason that he didn't there is because Colonel Parker would always want to be with Elvis. He was actually working and believed that if Elvis had gone to London, where there was huge demand. I mean, I think at one stage he was offered £1 million, and £1 million then was probably worth about 20 million now. And Colonel Parker said, that's for me. Now, what about the kid? So I think that the reason Parker didn't want to travel is that he didn't have a passport, and he was worried he would never get back into America.
That's correct, yeah. The famous rumour is that Colonel Parker couldn't leave America, and unfortunately that stopped Elvis from touring the world. There's lots of rumours as to that, you know, Parker probably wanted to keep Elvis exclusive to America even, because people had to fly to Las Vegas to see him there, and that kind of gave him that extra notoriety. But then there is the fact that Parker didn't have a passport. He was an illegal alien in America, and that was found out some time later. But there was lots of rumours that that people wanted him to perform in Australia and London, and I think there was even a rumour at one stage that he was asked to perform in front of the pyramids in Egypt, I believe.
Well,
but there's so many stories.
Absolutely. He's an iconic character, of course. He's an iconic character. I make an assumption, because I haven't read the book, just a synopsis that you sent me, that this book looks at the influence, the music, style and fashion that Elvis brought to the world, and what influence it brought into a very Puritan Ireland at the time, a very Catholic Ireland. We remember that Elvis was not allowed to be filmed from the waist down at one stage in America on television. What sort of impact did he have on the good old Catholic boys and girls of Ireland?
Well, that's for sure. My book does Elvis and Ireland. I'm telling the story of Elvis Presley's life, you know, as a lot of people know already, from hopefully some new perspectives that people haven't seen, but mostly an Irish perspective. So I'm focusing on the evolution of rock and roll music in Ireland, and at the beginning of that, you have the fact that RTE Radio at the time didn't play Elvis or rock and roll music at the time. You only had opera and classical, and they strictly wouldn't play anything that was modern. So everybody had to tune in to Radio Luxembourg, as I'm sure you remember.
Sure do.
Radio Luxembourg at the time, and that was all anyone had, but not everyone could access that either. So it was like this forbidden fruit for a lot of people, was tuning into this strange, exotic music. And the church at the time, as you mentioned, you know, the priests were, apart from the stories I've gathered now from a lot of people who experienced the times, was that they were calling him a sexual degenerate and an agent of Satan, and, you know, nuns even banned girls in their schools from going to see his films. And there was even a report that Archbishop McQuaid demanded a report on people who were listening to rock and roll. The church had such a stranglehold of people at the time, and because people still listened to Radio Luxembourg and they still went to see a few of his films, I have this theory, and I think a lot of people might find the same, was that it was the birth of the teenager at the time, and in Ireland, it might have been one of the first times that young people chose not to listen to what the church and the priests had to say, because they still tuned into Elvis and they still went to see his films.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because although I was born the 50s, I was a young kid, and my mother would listen more to Elvis than I did. But then I was a 60s kid, if you want, a 60s teenager, so halfway through, and I then started a band, one of the first groups, pop groups. You see, in Ireland, as you well know through your studies, that Ireland was mobbed by show bands who were suited gentlemen, ties and great respect. The Dickie Rocks, the Royal Show Band with Brendan Boyer, the Cadets, Butch Cassidy. No, is it Butch? I can't remember Cassidy. I can't remember his name. But many of the show bands, the Clipper Carltons, they date back to the late 40s and throughout the 50s. So Elvis, was just not my era. But the reason I'm telling you this is that you're talking about Catholic Ireland and the stranglehold that the church had on all the ballrooms in Ireland had no alcohol in them, and they had priests present at the dance. Now, we were invited as a pop group down to Tipperary to play an interval band, they called them. So when the show band leaves the stage, we were allowed to play 3 or 4 sets, 3 or 4 numbers, and it was sort of a way of getting pop groups were not unknown. So people down in the country had never really seen a pop group before, but only suited gentlemen. And I remember before going down to the country, I saw the Rolling Stones on one of the programs, Ready, Steady, Go or something, and they had on tab collar shirts, which have become quite fashionable now. No ties, just these tab collar shirts, and these are shirts with a sort of a tab across the top of them. And we got the band, the 5 of us tab collar shirts. I remember they were in a light lilac colour, and went on stage with them, and the priest stopped the show after our first song, pulled the plug, and told us to get off the stage, that you don't come to this town dressed so sexually.
That is what I keep coming across in my studies, and my research of rock and roll and pop music as it came about in Ireland. The show bands, as you were mentioned there, they were one of the first to present the new modern sound of American youth, but they did. I don't want to criticise the show bands too much, because I think they were an important part of music to begin with. They were like live jukeboxes. But when the beat groups, as yourself, I know you're in the King Bees, which one of the Green Beats were all these important beat groups that came about. They, even though you mightn't have experienced Elvis at the very start, I believe that the beat groups kind of represented a lot more of what Elvis was even about in the 50s, the raunchiness. And I think the show bands were a little more conservative. They didn't represent the Elvis of the 50s so much. And I think that unfortunately in the 50s there wasn't a rock revolution as there was in Britain. In Ireland. Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
That's the thing.
It was very, very restricted. The church, as you say, had a stranglehold on the youth in those days. What the bands were, we were very few of us. The Green Beats were different. The Green Beats were a tennis club band. They weren't playing with the big band. The big 2 groups, pop groups at that very time, were the biggest of all were the Creatures, and then us, the King Bees. So there was 2 big groups, and there was girls that would scream, and all that sort of screaming stuff was going on, and the Catholic Church did not like that at all, any of it.
Yeah. Like, I do focus on the Catholic Church now, on obviously the stranglehold it had, but it doesn't take up the entire book. There's only a small section focusing on that area, because as I said, I go on to talk about the evolution of rock music up to U2, which probably became the major entertainment export that Ireland has had, and they probably reached the pinnacle of rock and roll success. And the book focuses on Rory Gallagher and Phil Lynott, who were huge fans of Elvis, and they even represent the 60s and 70s, and it shows that Elvis just seemed to kind of transcend the generations, even up to my time now. My influence, that I find that Elvis has had a great influence on me. So I think he transcends generations, he transcends time, he transcends just class and religion and all those kind of things. And the book also goes on to talk about just the small fun facts and trivial links that Elvis had, you know, a little touch on his genealogy, tracing to Ireland, and when the music charts were first set up in Ireland, the first hit went to an Elvis song. The first number one hit.
Oh,
it was a song called "She's Not You," which came out in 1962, and Elvis also had the very first Christmas number one hit, which was "Return to Sender." So he seemed to still have a huge amount of popularity throughout the 60s, even though he was fading away into a movie career at the time.
You know, Joe Dolan, the late Joe Dolan, I don't know if you ever came across Joe Dolan. He had a show band then called the Drifters, and then he sort of had a hit the European hit with Make Me an Island, Joe Dolan. He was a great performer on stage. And I remember sitting down one day with him, we were having a chat, and every night he told me before he went on stage, he would run a video of Elvis live, you know, in what you call it, in Las Vegas. It just would inspire him, he told me, that to get on stage and put a great show together.
Yeah, I guess he mentioned Joe Dolan in the book because he recorded a few of Elvis's songs, and I focus a lot on all the musicians from any era at all, from the 50s up to now, who have covered Elvis's songs. There's quite a list of bands, you know, whether it's singers like Mary Coughlan and Imelda May, or the Trills and the Pogues and the Cranberries and the Hot House Flowers and Damien Dempsey. They've all the big names that's come out of Ireland. They have all recorded at least one Elvis song, and it seems that he seems to touch everybody in some way.
He certainly does. You know, interesting enough about Elvis songs, there are very few covers of Elvis's songs, because I don't think anyone could attempt to do Elvis rather than Elvis.
Well, that's true, yeah. I suppose it's debated and argued that his voice was very unique, and his approach to music was very special. He had that charisma, you know, that people talk about, and it's inexplicable. That when you hear an Elvis song, it is very, very, very distinct compared to
absolutely. You know what I mean? You know, interesting, as I told you last night when we had a brief chat, I had, and delighted to have interviewed Ray Walker, and Ray Walker goes right back to the time that Elvis was recording, telling me that he was a total, even as a kid, a total perfectionist, and how many takes he had to take to get even the band said, "Come on, El, that's good enough." Elvis kept going over it and over it and over it, refused until he was satisfied. That was one of the stories. The other story was about It's Now or Never, and telling me that Elvis found it very hard about hitting that very last operatic note, and Ray Walker was telling Elvis, "You've got to pretend you're throwing up at that note, and that's how you'll hit that note." And finally, Ray Walker told me that Elvis wasn't too keen on having a bath, and he said he would come into the studio and take his shoes off after a while, and you'd need to fumigate the place after Elvis left. He said you could hardly breathe in the place, because you must remember where Elvis came from. He didn't come from a place that had baths normally.
That's the thing, yeah. He was, I suppose, a
hillbilly.
He was a hillbilly. He was the working class of the South of America. He grew up around the cotton fields, and his mother worked in cotton fields, and he grew up around the black music of the time.
Sure.
And he was immersed in black music, and that's what he absorbed, and then that was his output when he got into music. And speaking there, you mentioned It's Now or Never, about Elvis was even tried to go beyond rock and roll and enter opera music to a certain degree, even though he wouldn't have had the full octave range of a tenor. He was very much influenced by Irish tenors, and that's another area I mentioned throughout the book. Was Elvis recorded Danny Boy and songs like I'll Take You Home Again, Kathleen, which were famous for John McCormack and Joseph Locke. And these are singers probably Elvis would have heard on the radio even growing up, because in an interview in Germany, when Elvis was in Germany, he was asked about classical music. And he said it was an area that he was only discovering, but that he had a keen interest in Irish tenors. And little things like that, they interested me when I was discovering Elvis and reading about him, because it's always nice to see something that's mention to do with your own country in relation to this international and worldwide icon.
Sure. He also recorded a song by the Irish writer Phil. What's his name?
Phil Coulter.
Yeah, he did it. Something Boy, I think it was called.
That's correct. Yeah, there's a song called My Boy.
My Boy. Yeah.
Richard Harris, the actor Richard Harris, recorded that originally for a Radio Luxembourg contest, and somehow Elvis heard it and said, that's the song I'm going to record. And then Elvis went ahead and recorded it, and it became, a number 4 hit for him in Ireland.
He was also fascinated, as an obvious story I heard the other day, he was also fascinated by sheriff's badges, guns, etc., etc. And he wanted, remember the narcotics badge, the famous story, going to the White House and Nixon giving him the badge because no one else would give him. But one of the bodyguards was telling me that the difficult time was Elvis's birthday, is what to buy Elvis for his birthday present. So they would gather and ask Elvis what he would like, and he asked for a blue light for his car, a police light. So they got in touch with the sheriff and asked the sheriff, was it possible to get one for Elvis? And the sheriff said, it's a huge task you're asking here. And he said, look, if you don't get it for Elvis, Elvis is going to go to the damn president. So we might as well give it to him. But he did get the blue light for his car, and it was a few weeks later the sheriff called up Graceland to the security and saying to them, look, we have a problem with Elvis. He keeps pulling people over for speeding and giving them citations.
Yeah, there's lots of stories. The later period of Elvis, there's a lot of quirky stories and unusual things, and I think with Elvis he got very bored a lot of the time, and this was a bit of amusement for him, it seems.
Sure, I can imagine. He died almost broke. I know someone who was involved in that. He died with $5 million. Now, to a lot of people, $5 million sounds a lot of money, but to run his home and his staff and everything, $5 million would go very quickly in his plane. So he was almost broke, and they say it was the brilliance of Priscilla Presley that turned the whole thing around.
That's very true. Yeah, Priscilla, if she hadn't. She had the foresight, and she made it work. She made Graceland become this huge museum, this internationally famous museum, apparently the second most visited home in America, and she turned something that was so small into something so huge, because Elvis at the time Elvis died, there's reports that Colonel Parker was getting 50% of Elvis, and which was an outrageous amount for a manager to be getting, and Parker was apparently squandering all the money away.
Gambling.
Yeah. And Elvis was extremely charitable, as a lot of people know, and he just seemed to give an enormous amount of his fortune away to people as well, and never seemed to think of the next day, because he was making money and making huge amounts of money throughout the 60s, and I suppose he just didn't realise that someday it was going to be all gone, but he died before it all did. So.
What do you think? Ivor Casey, Nuala Holloway, did she do the painting of Elvis on your book cover?
That's correct, yes. She painted the cover, and there's some drawings in the middle as well throughout the book, and I have an artist by the name of Don Conroy and another artist by the name of Jackie Moore, who also contributed work, and I felt we would add an extra Irish dimension by having Irish artists, because there's so many photo books of Elvis. There's thousands of books on Elvis, and it contains so many photographs, and obtaining new and rare photographs is becoming quite the feat nowadays, because so many have been released. So I just thought, why not? I know some artists, and they're great at their skill and their craft. So
I think Jackie Moore did a painting for me out here. I'm not sure, but I think she did. Certainly Jackie.
All right, okay.
So I think she was out here. I'm not sure. Anyway, look, it's great to speak to you. Now, this book, how do we buy this book? Where do we get it? Tell us, direct us how to get hold of it.
At the moment, I suppose down where you are in Spain, it's on Amazon.es, and it's available on all the Amazons throughout Europe and in America. At the moment in Dublin, I have it for sale in Tower Records on Wicklow Street, and at the Celtic Note shop on Nassau Street. It's also available in a shop in Dalkey called the Corner Note. It's a little cafe who have launched the book for me, and hopefully I will be doing a launch in a few weeks' time, an official launch of the book.
Excellent.
And that's being talked about and discussed at the moment, so there'll be reports on that later on.
How's it gone down?
It's going down quite well. All the feedback I've got has been very positive. I've been hearing such nice things from strangers who I wasn't expecting to hear things from, and it's been doing well, and I'm delighted so far with its success, and it's only in 30 stages.
I hope so. I had a young girl, I can't remember, Helen, I think was her name last week, an Irish authoress who's written a book about pirate radio stations. It was a novel about pirate radio stations in Ireland, and she had a deal with HarperCollins, which is a big deal. At the end, she pulled out of that deal as she self-published, and now her book has been made into a movie in Hollywood. So, but they've got an option on the book. So let's hope that's going to happen to you. I think it's a great title, Elvis and Ireland. My guest, Ivor Casey. Ivor, thanks for joining us on the show today.